Hello everyone, and welcome back to Flying Through the Gyroplane Flying Handbook. In this video, we're going to start on Chapter 6, which is all about gyroplane flight operations, so normal things that you do in a gyroplane. So the very first thing, of course, that you want to do with any aircraft before you go fly it is do a pre-flight. So we're going to talk about pre-flights and other things in this video. So pre-flight, you want to start by walking through a checklist. You really should use a checklist whenever you do a pre-flight, whether it's one that you made or one that you got from the manufacturer. When I had a flight school many years ago, I had some flight instructors that would pre-flight without using a checklist, and I scolded them a lot for that because they're setting a bad example. And, to give you an idea, even aircraft that I've built, I will still use a written checklist because it is very easy to forget things. Okay, so we're going to do a quick pre-flight for a Cavalon. This one's a 914 powered Cavalon. And of course, we're going to use checklist. So let's go ahead and get started. And this checklist, by the way, I just printed out from the manual, which I recommend you do. Kind of mark it up to match your machine and kind of go from there. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to check our paperwork, and we also want to go ahead and do things like pump up the rotor brake. It's not on the checklist, but the machine hasn't been flown in a little bit. So I'm going to open the door by reaching through the window. And then I will pump up the brake. All right, so I've turned the switch to on, and I have it in brake mode, and I will push down that switch. And now my pressure has gone up, and I can once again not worry about the rotor flopping around as I move the machine and such. Okay, so we start at the front, and we can drain our fuel tanks. There's a drain up underneath, and we also want to make sure there's no snow or ice, and we want to check our pitot. Our pitot is here. There's not a cover installed in this one. You just want to make sure it's clear, and if there is a cover, that it's been removed. We could take the tie down off, but at this point it's probably not a great idea. You might want to give it a little bit of time, and when you actually start moving the machine and you get ready to take off, that's the time to take that off. Looking at our nose wheel, looks in good condition. I see that it's inflated and it has proper tread. Okay, so at station 2 here, I'm going to check my static port, which is right below the door. I want to make sure that that's clear. All right, left the door open a little bit. And according to my checklist, I'm checking things like my levers. I might want to engage my parking brake if I don't want to move the machine. Engage light like so. Heats are off. Throttle. My controls are connected. If I needed to adjust my rudder pedals, I could do that at this point. And I can also inspect my doors and my windows to make sure there are no cracks. It's a common issue that people will get cracks right here in the corner, especially in these machines. And what happens is people use the window when they're opening and closing the door. So there's a little tip for that. When you close the door, get it closed and then sort of slam it. And when you open the door, you want to reach in, fully retract the latch, don't just let it go, and then use that handle to gently pull the door open and then kind of go on your way. Okay, so from here we're going to check our main gear on the right side. Once again, it's inflated. It seems to have proper tread, and I can also check the brake pad situation. I also recently inspected this machine, so I know that this one is pretty good. And then from there, we look at our cowl, make sure that everything is tight. There's a door here that you can open, and this will allow you to inspect the oil level, which I've already done. And you can also kind of look in to the cowl. You could even use a light to make sure that everything looks good there. While I'm here, I can also check the cooler for the oil. Now it's a little bit chilly here today, so we have one piece of tape kind of blocking that to help our oil temperatures be up a little higher. You can adjust that throughout the different seasons depending on where you live in order to get optimal cooling or not as much cooling of your oil. Next up, we're going to check our propeller, make sure it's nick-free. We also can make sure that it's clean. Even just a little bit of bugs on the prop and the rotor can cause a little bit of vibration. So, you know, this does have a little bit of bugs. As far as cleaning that off, normally I just recommend just water, microfiber cloth, you know, nothing harsh. Sometimes people use chemicals, but a little bit sticky, and then things stick to your prop. Spinner looks good. Little tip, if you have a spinner installed and you uninstall it, make sure you make note of where all the screws went. One way of balancing a propeller is actually to have different weighted screws on the spinner, and you want to be careful to make sure that you put them back in the same place, otherwise you don't have a balanced propeller anymore. Checking our rock guard here, and that looks good. Everything looks good with our tail. Everything looks tight. I can check my rudder. Those hinges look good. I can actually get down below the machine and check the cables, which I'll do real quick. And everything looks to be in order. Remember, in a previous video, we warned you about the trim tab. We said, don't be the person that takes that trim tab and then bends it straight. If it was straight, it has no purpose in being here. So that looks pretty good, and we're ready to move on. Okay, so this brings us to this side. We're going to again check all of our cowling screws, make sure that those are tight. This has a little port to plug in the battery charger to keep it nice and charged. Looking at my other gear, once again everything looks to be fine there. I can also check my fuel level. I'm not going to do that just yet. Right now I'm going to go up and have a look at my rotor head, and I'm looking at the gears on the rotor head to make sure that none of them are chipped or worn. I'm also looking at all of the torque stripe on my various parts for my rotor head. I want to make sure that everything looks as it should, and it does. All right, next up, we're going to check our fuel level. So I'm going to take my fuel cap off. Now, some people have different ideas on what to do with the fuel cap. Some people will put it on top of the machine. Some people will put it in their seat. You know, do whatever feels right to you. I'll just put it in the seat real quick. That way, if I try to take off with this not in place, I'll probably notice it when I sit on it. So we'll just pop this in there. And it looks like I got at least 30 liters of fuel in my tank. And finally, we're checking the left-hand side of the cockpit. We want to make sure that if the stick is installed, it's installed correctly. I could look under this boot, make sure everything's in place. Also, funny story on this machine, when we first got it, they had never plugged the controls from the stick on this side in. So that was something we had to do after our first flight. So I want to make sure that that's tight. If I added some fuel, I could once again turn on the switch and check my fuel level, and it seems to correspond well with what the stick just measured. So I'm a little bit under half tanks. And that's pretty much how you pre-flight a Catalan. As a reminder, this is not intended to substitute for any kind of instruction, and you should look at the manual for your aircraft. And we just kind of did a very basic pre-flight. So, use your manual, do what the manufacturer says, and of course talk to your flight instructor. Well, that's all for this video. We'll see you in the next one.